The chains around her wrists clanked against the wooden table as she stood alone, a waitress with 3 jobs and not a single ally in the crowded courtroom. The judge barely glanced up from his papers as he prepared to read the guilty verdict. 15 years for a crime she never committed. No evidence mattered, no plea was heard. Then the heavy doors swung open, freezing every person in the room. The notorious Yakuza boss walked down the center aisle, his presence commanding instant silence. But instead of violence, he bowed to the court and spoke words no one expected. "This woman is innocent. I am guilty. Take me instead." From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe in unexpected moments of justice, please consider subscribing for more powerful stories. The fluorescent lights of Tokyo Central Courthouse buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow that made everyone look sickly and washed out. Everyone except prosecutor Junichiro Tanabe, whose confident smile seemed impervious to the unflattering light as he arranged papers at his table with meticulous precision. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his crimson tie a slash of power against crisp white cotton. Across the aisle, Midori Hayashi sat alone at the defendant's table, her small frame nearly swallowed by the oversized chair. The standard-issue detention center clothing hung loosely on her thin body, pale blue shirt and pants that had been worn by countless defendants before her. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup softening her exhausted features. At 28, she looked both younger and older simultaneously, young in her small stature and delicate features, old in the shadows beneath her eyes and the tightness around her mouth. The handcuffs around her wrists clinked softly as she adjusted her position, trying to find comfort where none existed. 3 court officers stood at strategic positions around the room, their expressions professional and detached. They had seen hundreds like her pass through, and would see hundreds more. All rise for the Honorable Judge Yoshiro Matsuda. The courtroom rustled to attention as the side door opened and Judge Matsuda entered, his black robes flowing behind him. At 65, his face was a roadmap of deep lines and sagging jowls, his expression set in the permanent downward turn of someone who had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. He took his seat with practiced efficiency, barely glancing at the packed gallery before turning his attention to the papers before him. "Be seated," he instructed, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of a lifetime smoker. "Case number 2347B, Tokyo Prefecture versus Hayashi Midori, charges of grand theft and embezzlement. Counselors, identify yourselves for the record." "Junichiro Tanabe for the prosecution, Your Honor," the prosecutor announced, standing with perfect posture. There was a beat of silence before the woman. Midori's side seemed to remember her role. "Fumiko Nakano, court-appointed defense, Your Honor," she said, rising halfway from her seat before sitting again immediately. Defense attorney Nakano was in her 60s, with gray-streaked hair cut in a practical bob and a worn navy suit that had seen better days. Unlike the prosecutor's carefully arranged materials, her single thin folder lay unopened on the table. She had yet to make eye contact with her client. Judge Matsuda nodded. "Prosecutor Tanabe, you may proceed with opening statements." Tanabe rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is straightforward. The defendant, Midori Hayashi, worked as a nighttime cleaning person at the offices of the prestigious Nakamura Financial Group. Using her position of trust and access to the building during off hours, she stole 50 million yen from the company's secure vault. He moved from behind his table with measured steps, commanding the courtroom's attention. The evidence will show that Ms. Hayashi had access to the security codes necessary to enter restricted areas. Her fingerprints were found on the safe. Security footage places her in the executive offices at the time of the theft, offices she had no legitimate reason to access as part of her cleaning duties. And most damningly, a deposit appeared in her personal account the very next day. Whispers rippled through the gallery. A reporter in the front row scribbled notes furiously, while others tapped on tablets or smartphones. The story had already generated significant media interest. The narrative of a lowly cleaning woman attempting to steal millions had proven irresistible to news outlets. The prosecution will prove beyond reasonable doubt that Midori Hayashi abused her position of trust, stole 50 million yen from her employers, and must be held accountable for this serious crime. Thank you. Tanabe returned to his seat, smoothly rebuttoning his jacket as he sat. Judge Matsuda turned to the defense table. Ms. Nakano, your opening statement? The defense attorney rose with none of the prosecutor's fluid confidence. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The evidence against her is circumstantial, and we will show that other explanations exist for her presence in the executive offices. Thank you. She sat down again immediately. Midori's face remained impassive, though a careful observer might have noticed her fingers tightening slightly against each other in her lap. The brevity and half-hearted delivery of her defense couldn't have escaped her notice. Prosecutor, call your first witness, Judge Matsuda instructed, checking his watch with poorly disguised impatience. The prosecution calls Hiroki Nakamura. A distinguished man in his 50s approached the witness stand. As CEO of Nakamura Financial Group, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. After being sworn in, he settled into the chair with the ease of someone who belonged there. Mr. Nakamura, please describe the security protocols at your company offices, Tanabe began. Nakamura Financial deals with sensitive client information and significant assets. Our security is state-of-the-art. All employees have key cards with varying levels of access. The executive floor and vault areas require both keycard access and numerical codes that change weekly. Only executives and security personnel should have these codes. And the defendant? What access level did she have? Ms. Hayashi was contracted through a cleaning service. Her keycard permitted access to general areas only, specifically after business hours from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. She would have had no legitimate reason to be on the executive floor or near the vault. Yet, security footage shows her in precisely these restricted areas on the night of the theft, correct? Yes. Our security system flagged unauthorized access to the executive floor at 2:17 a.m. Footage shows Ms. Hayashi in the hallway outside the finance director's office, which connects to our secure room. As Nakamura testified, the prosecution displayed security footage on the courtroom screens. The grainy black and white video showed a small figure, unmistakably Midori, walking down a hallway, looking over her shoulder several times. Without context, her movements indeed appeared suspicious. And when was the theft discovered? Tanabe continued. The next morning, 50 million yen, cash, missing from the vault. Our weekly audit would normally have caught it, but a finance officer noticed discrepancies immediately. Thank you, Mr. Nakamura. No further questions. Tanabe returned to his seat, looking pleased with the testimony. Judge Matsuda turned to the defense table. Your cross-examination, Ms. Nakano? Nakano rose slowly, consulting a single sheet of paper. Mr. Nakamura, why would you keep 50 million yen in cash at your offices? Doesn't that seem unusual for a financial institution? Nakamura's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. We had a major client transaction scheduled for the following day. The client specifically requested cash. And how many people knew about this cash transfer? Objection, Tanabe interrupted. Relevance. I'm establishing that others had knowledge of and access to the funds, Nakano countered. Overruled. The witness will answer. Nakamura straightened his tie. Senior management and the security team were informed, approximately 12 people. Including the finance director whose office Ms. Hayashi is seen passing in that footage? Yes, Sato-san would have known. No further questions. Nakano returned to her seat without pursuing this potentially promising line of inquiry further. Throughout this exchange, Midori remained perfectly still, her eyes downcast. Only the slight rise and fall of her chest indicated she was breathing at all. She might have been. Invisible for all the attention paid to her as a person, rather than as the accused. The prosecution called several more witnesses, the security officer who reviewed the footage, a forensic accountant who detailed the missing funds, and a bank representative who confirmed the deposit to Midori's account the morning after the theft. This deposit of 175,000 yen, Tanabe emphasized, appeared in the defendant's account less than 6 hours after the theft. That was my paycheck, Midori said softly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was barely audible in the large courtroom. Judge Matsuda frowned down at her. Defendant, you will not speak unless questioned directly. Ms. Nakano, control your client. Apologies, Your Honor, Nakano murmured, without looking at Midori. The morning proceeded with methodical efficiency. each prosecution witness building the case against Midori. During a brief recess, she sat alone at the defense table while Nakano stepped outside, presumably to smoke. The faint smell of tobacco accompanied her return 10 minutes later. When the court reconvened, the prosecution called their final witness. The state calls Yumiko Tanaka. A middle-aged woman with a severe bob and glasses approached the stand. After being sworn in, she sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap. "Ms. Tanaka, what is your relationship to the defendant?" Tanabe asked. "I was her supervisor at the Sakura Cafe for approximately 8 months, ending last year." "And why did her employment there end?" "She was frequently late for shifts and made several cash register errors." Midori's head lifted slightly at this, a small furrow appearing between her brows. "Did you consider her reliable?" "Not particularly. She was very private, rarely spoke to coworkers, and seemed to be hiding something. I wasn't surprised when I heard about the theft." "Objection," Nakano said, finally showing some energy. "Speculative and prejudicial." "Sustained," Judge Matsuda agreed. "The jury will disregard the witness's final comment." Tanabe nodded, having already accomplished his goal of planting doubt about Midori's character. "No further questions." Nakano rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Tanaka, are you aware that Ms. Hayashi was working 3 jobs during her employment at your cafe?" "She mentioned having other work, yes." "And might that explain her occasional lateness rather than any character flaw?" Tanaka sniffed. "Professional people manage their time appropriately. Were any of these register errors ever proven to benefit Ms. Hayashi personally? Did money go missing?" "Well, no," Tanaka admitted reluctantly. "The amounts were always reconciled eventually." "So just calculation errors that were later corrected?" "Yes, but—" "Thank you. No further questions." It was the strongest defense Nakano had mounted all day, yet still woefully inadequate given the serious charges Midori faced. As Tanaka was dismissed, a subtle shift in the courtroom's energy suggested people were preparing for proceedings to wrap up, reporters closing notebooks, spectators checking watches. Judge Matsuda turned to the defense table. "Ms. Nakano, you may call your first witness." Nakano cleared her throat. "The defense calls no witnesses, Your Honor." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Even Judge Matsuda raised his eyebrows slightly. "No witnesses at all?" "No, Your Honor. My client will not testify, as is her right." Midori's hands tightened in her lap, knuckles whitening. This was clearly news to her. The decision not to mount a defense beyond cross-examination was unusual, especially in a case with such serious charges. "Very well," Judge Matsuda said. "Then we'll proceed to closing statements." Tanabe rose again, his confidence even more pronounced than before. "Your Honor, the prosecution has presented clear, compelling evidence of the defendant's guilt. Security footage places her in restricted areas she had no legitimate reason to access. Her fingerprints were found on the safe. Money appeared in her account the next morning. The case is straightforward." He turned slightly to address the courtroom at large. "Some might view Midori Hayashi as a sympathetic figure, a struggling woman working multiple jobs who saw an opportunity and took it. But theft is theft, regardless of circumstances. The Nakamura Financial Group serves hundreds of clients who trust their assets will be protected. This breach of security and trust must have consequences. The prosecution asks for a guilty verdict and the maximum sentence of 15 years to send a clear message that such crimes will not be tolerated." He returned to his seat with the satisfied air of someone who knew victory was imminent. Judge Matsuda turned to the defense table. "Ms. Nakano, your closing statement?" Nakano stood, referring to her sparse notes. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case relies on circumstantial evidence that can be interpreted in multiple ways. My client maintains she was simply performing her cleaning duties and never accessed the vault or took any money. The deposit to her account was her regular paycheck. While the evidence may appear compelling at first glance, reasonable doubt exists. We ask for acquittal on all charges." The perfunctory defense lasted barely a minute. Nakano sat down immediately after finishing, not even glancing at Midori, who remained perfectly still beside her. Judge Matsuda shuffled papers before him. "Before I render my verdict, does the defendant wish to make a statement?" For the first time, all attention turned directly to Midori herself. She hesitated, then slowly rose to her feet, the chains at her wrists clinking softly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "I have always tried to live honestly," she said simply. "I work hard at my jobs. I care for my elderly neighbor. I have never stolen anything in my life. I did not take this money." The statement held a dignity that contrasted sharply with the dismissive treatment she'd received throughout the proceedings. For a brief moment, she was a person rather than a case number. Judge Matsuda's expression remained impassive. "Thank you, Ms. Hayashi." He glanced down at papers before him, already prepared, many in the courtroom realized. This verdict had been determined long before Midori ever spoke. "Having considered the evidence presented, I find the defendant, Midori Hayashi, guilty of grand theft and embezzlement as charged." A soft murmur ran through the gallery. Not of surprise, the outcome had seemed inevitable from the start, but the confirmation of expectations. Reporters immediately began typing on phones and tablets, eager to file their stories about the cleaning woman convicted of a multi-million-yen theft. "Sentencing will now commence," Judge Matsuda continued without pause. "Given the significant amount stolen and breach of trust involved, this court sentences you to 15 years imprisonment at Tokyo Women's Correctional Facility." 15 years. The maximum sentence, delivered without hesitation or consideration of mitigating factors. Midori's expression didn't change, though she swayed slightly on her feet before steadying herself. "Furthermore, you are ordered to make restitution in the full amount of 50 million yen to Nakamura Financial Group." An impossible sum for someone who counted coins for train fare. The sentence wasn't just imprisonment, but financial ruin that would follow her long after release. Judge Matsuda began reading the formal conclusion to the proceedings, his voice taking on the mechanical cadence of oft-repeated phrases. "The defendant will be remanded immediately to custody to begin serving her sentence. Court costs are assessed to the defendant. These proceedings are hereby—" The heavy main doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with deliberate force, the sound echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. Judge Matsuda looked up, irritation at the interruption clear on his face. "This court is in session," he snapped. "Who dares—" The words died in his throat as a man entered, walking with unhurried confidence down the center aisle. He was perhaps 40, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that spoke of extraordinary wealth. His black hair was cut perfectly to frame striking features, with a single silver streak at the temple, adding distinction rather than age. 4 men in similar suits followed at a respectful distance, their watchful eyes and disciplined movements marking them unmistakably as security personnel. The newcomer's presence transformed the atmosphere instantly. Police officers stationed around the courtroom straightened, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. The prosecutor half rose from his seat, then seemed to think better of it and slowly sat again. Spectators drew back, creating a bubble of space around the aisle where the man walked. Only Midori seemed unaffected, her expression showing simple confusion rather than the recognition or fear evident on other faces. The man continued his measured approach until he stood directly before the judge's bench. He bowed, not deeply, but with precise formality that somehow managed to convey respect without subservience. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "I must interrupt these proceedings to correct a grave injustice." Judge Matsuda had regained his composure, though his complexion remained paler than before. "This is highly irregular. Who are you, and what business do you have in my courtroom?" "My name is Kazuto Ishikawa," the man replied calmly, "and I have information directly relevant to the case you are about to conclude erroneously." The name rippled through the courtroom like an electric current. Reporters who had been preparing to leave now frantically returned to their seats, fingers flying across devices. The prosecutor's face had drained of color entirely. Kazuto Ishikawa. Even those with only passing knowledge of Tokyo's power structures recognized the name. Head of the Ishikawa Gumi, one of the city's most influential Yakuza families. A man whose business interests spanned legitimate enterprises and shadowy operations alike. Someone who was speculated about often but rarely seen, and never in places like courtrooms. "This is most irregular," Judge Matsuda repeated, though with notably less conviction. "These proceedings are nearly concluded." "They are concluded prematurely and incorrectly," Ishikawa replied, his tone remaining respectful but firm. Midori Hayashi is innocent of the charges against her. All eyes turned to Midori, who appeared more confused than anyone. She clearly had no idea who this man was, or why he would intercede on her behalf. "This is absurd," Prosecutor Tanabe found his voice, standing to object. "The court has rendered its verdict based on clear evidence. This interruption is inappropriate and potentially illegal." Ishikawa turned slightly to regard the prosecutor, his expression unchanged but somehow more intense. Tanabe visibly flinched under the gaze, though Ishikawa had made no threatening move. "The evidence," Ishikawa said quietly, "is incomplete at best and falsified at worst." He turned back to the judge. "I request 5 minutes to present new information that will exonerate Ms. Hayashi completely." Judge Matsuda hesitated, visibly calculating the political and possibly personal ramifications of either permitting or denying this request. Finally, he nodded once. "5 minutes, Mr. Ishikawa, but be advised that interfering with court proceedings is itself a serious offense." If Ishikawa was concerned by this warning, he showed no sign. He gestured to one of his men, who approached with a slim briefcase. Opening it, Ishikawa removed several folders and placed them on the prosecutor's table. "These documents show conclusively that the 50 million yen in question was never stolen by Ms. Hayashi. Rather, it was transferred through a complex series of transactions as part of a money laundering operation that has been ongoing at Nakamura Financial Group for the past 3 years." Nakamura, still seated in the gallery, surged to his feet. "This is outrageous, pure slander." "It is documented fact," Ishikawa countered smoothly, removing additional papers from the briefcase. "Complete financial records, witness statements, and internal communications detailing how Nakamura Financial has been processing funds for several organizations, including, on occasion, my own." The admission of his own organization's involvement, delivered without hesitation, stunned the courtroom into silence. Kazuto Ishikawa had just publicly acknowledged a connection to money laundering operations, seemingly unconcerned about potential legal consequences to himself. Ms. Hayashi's presence in the executive hallway that night was indeed unusual, but not for the reasons suggested by the prosecution, Ishikawa continued. While cleaning, she discovered financial documents carelessly left in plain view, documents that indicated illegal activity. Security footage from cameras the prosecution conveniently failed to include shows her simply performing her regular cleaning duties, including in the finance director's office where she was authorized to clean. He gestured to another of his men, who approached with a tablet displaying additional security footage. This showed Midori clearly cleaning the office in question, not behaving suspiciously at all. When Nakamura executives realized she had seen potentially incriminating documents, they orchestrated this theft accusation to discredit her and ensure any claims she might make would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a convicted thief. Judge Matsuda leaned forward, his expression troubled. "These are extremely serious allegations, Mr. Ishikawa. Why would you involve yourself in this matter?" For the first time, Ishikawa turned to look directly at Midori. Their eyes met across the courtroom, his knowing, hers bewildered. "That," he said quietly, "is a more complex question with a very simple answer. But first, justice must be served. Midori Hayashi is innocent. The evidence before you proves this conclusively." The courtroom had erupted into chaotic whispers. Reporters were frantically typing on phones and tablets. Nakamura remained standing, his face now flushed with anger or fear or both. The prosecutor was hurriedly examining the documents Ishikawa had provided, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Judge Matsuda banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! This court will have order." When the noise subsided, he fixed Ishikawa with a stern look. "I will need to review these materials before making any determination." "Of course, Your Honor," Ishikawa agreed smoothly. "However, given the new evidence, I request that Ms. Hayashi be released. On bail pending your review, she poses no flight risk and has maintained her innocence throughout." The judge hesitated, clearly calculating the political implications of his next decision. He glanced at the prosecutor, perhaps seeking guidance, but Tanabe was still absorbed in the documents, his expression growing more alarmed with each page he turned. "This court will take a 30-minute recess while I review these materials in chambers," Judge Matsuda announced finally. The The defendant will remain in custody during this time. As the judge rose and exited through his private door, the courtroom exploded into activity. The prosecutor hurried after the judge, documents in hand. Nakamura was quickly surrounded by several men in suits, lawyers presumably, engaged in urgent whispered conversation. Throughout it all, Midori remained seated at the defense table, handcuffs still securing her wrists, confusion evident on her face as she occasionally glanced toward Ishikawa, who had taken a seat in the gallery. Their eyes met briefly across the room, the Yakuza boss and the waitress, connected by circumstances neither fully understood yet. The court officers, uncertain how to proceed with this unusual development, maintained their positions around the room, occasionally exchanging bewildered glances. No one approached Ishikawa or his men, despite their dramatic interruption of court proceedings. As the recess continued and speculation ran rampant through the courtroom, one fact became increasingly clear to everyone present. The simple embezzlement case that had seemed destined for a quick conviction and lengthy sentence had transformed into something far more complex and potentially explosive. And at the center of it all remained Midori Hayashi, the overlooked waitress whose fate now seemed intertwined with one of Tokyo's most powerful and dangerous men. The 30-minute recess stretched to 45 minutes, then to a full hour. The courtroom remained packed, no one willing to leave despite the delay. Reporters huddled in small groups, trading theories in hushed voices. Court officers maintained their positions, occasionally stealing glances at Kazuto. Ishikawa, who sat perfectly composed in the gallery, eyes closed as if meditating on the proceedings. Midori remained at the defense table, still handcuffed, her court-appointed attorney now frantically reviewing the documents Ishikawa had provided. For the first time that day, Fumiko Nakano appeared genuinely engaged in her client's defense, though she kept shooting nervous glances toward Ishikawa. When Judge Matsuda finally returned, his face was grave. He took his seat and arranged papers before him, with unusual care, taking more time than necessary, as if delaying the inevitable. The prosecutor followed, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He avoided looking at Nakamura, who sat rigidly in the gallery, surrounded by increasingly agitated attorneys. "Court is back in session," the judge announced, his voice lacking its earlier authoritative tone. "Having reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Ishikawa, this court finds sufficient cause to suspend the sentencing of Midori Hayashi, pending further investigation." A collective murmur swept through the room, not an exoneration, but a significant step back from the 15-year sentence that had seemed inevitable an hour earlier. Furthermore, Judge Matsuda continued, in light of the new evidence suggesting possible fabrication of charges, the court grants the defense motion for release on personal recognizance. The defendant will report weekly to court officers until this matter is resolved. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, if I may, the state requests time to examine these new documents thoroughly. While they raise questions, they don't definitively exonerate Ms. Hayashi." "Agreed," the judge nodded. 2 weeks for both prosecution and defense to review all evidence. We'll reconvene on October 15th. He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." As a court officer approached to remove Midori's handcuffs, chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters rushed toward the exits, already dictating breaking news updates into phones. Nakamura and his attorneys quickly moved toward a side door, pursued by several journalists shouting questions about money laundering allegations. Midori rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had been, the reality of her unexpected reprieve not yet fully registering in her expression. For months, she had lived with the certainty of conviction hanging over her. Now, suddenly, there was a glimmer of hope, delivered by the most unlikely savior imaginable. Defense attorney Nakano was gathering her materials with newfound energy. "We'll need to meet tomorrow to discuss strategy," she told Midori, as if she hadn't been practically absent during the entire trial. "This changes everything. I'll have my assistant call to schedule." Midori nodded silently, watching as Nakano hurried away, already pulling out her phone. Left alone at the defense table, Midori finally gathered her few personal possessions: a small notebook, a worn wallet, a simple hair tie, that had been placed in a manila envelope. She looked up to find Kazuto Ishikawa standing before her, his presence commanding even without words. Up close, she could see details invisible from across the courtroom: the perfect precision of his tailoring, the subtle but unmistakable quality of his watch, the intelligent assessment in his dark eyes. "Hayashi-san," he said, his voice quieter than when addressing the court, but no less precise. "May I speak with you privately?" Midori hesitated. Everything about this man signaled danger to her instincts. Not just his reputation, which she was now vaguely piecing together from overheard comments, but the sheer power he projected effortlessly. Yet, he had just saved her from 15 years in prison. "Why did you help me?" she asked directly, her voice steady, despite her confusion. "That explanation requires more privacy than this courthouse allows," he replied. "I've arranged transportation, if you're willing to hear it." Midori glanced around the emptying courtroom. Her court-appointed attorney had already vanished. The prosecutor was engaged in intense conversation with several officials near the judge's chambers. No one was paying attention to her anymore, the invisible waitress once again, despite being at the center of the day's drama. "I have nothing to lose by listening," she decided, "but I need to collect my belongings from detention first." Ishikawa nodded. "Of course, my driver will wait." 20 minutes later, having reclaimed her small backpack containing the few possessions she'd had when arrested, Midori found herself approaching a sleek black sedan parked outside the courthouse. One of Ishikawa's men held the door open for her with formal courtesy. The interior was luxurious but understated. Soft leather seats, privacy partition, subtle climate control that immediately enveloped her in comfort after months of harsh detention center conditions. Ishikawa sat opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Where are we going?" Midori asked as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "A private restaurant where we can speak freely," he replied. "Unless you would prefer another location?" Midori considered this. Her tiny apartment had likely been rented to someone else by now, her possessions either stored by her elderly neighbor or discarded. She had no family in Tokyo, no real friends close enough to turn to after months of detention. "The restaurant is fine," she said finally. They rode in silence for several minutes, Midori watching the city pass by through tinted windows, Ishikawa watching her with unreadable expression. Finally, as the car turned into a quiet district of traditional buildings, he spoke again. "You truly don't remember, do you?" Midori turned from the window. "Remember what?" Before he could answer, the car stopped outside a small, elegant restaurant with a traditional wooden facade. No signage identified it, the kind of exclusive establishment that relied on clients already knowing of its existence. Inside, they were immediately led to a private dining room with minimalist decor and a table set for two. The staff bowed deeply to Ishikawa, their deference suggesting he was a regular and valued patron. Once tea had been served and the door closed, leaving them in complete privacy, Midori's patience ran out. "Please explain why you intervened in my trial," she said. "I'm grateful, but I don't understand. I've never met you before today." Ishikawa set down his teacup. "5 years ago," he began, "you worked at a small restaurant called Maida Kitchen in the Kita district." Midori nodded slowly. "Yes, I worked there for almost 3 years, evening shifts mainly. On the night of March 17th, 5 years ago, a young man collapsed at one of your tables. Do you recall this incident?" She frowned slightly, searching her memory. "I remember something like that. A customer had some kind of medical emergency. An ambulance came. Before the ambulance arrived," Ishikawa continued, his voice perfectly controlled, "this young man had stopped breathing. The other patrons backed away. Some took videos with their phones. No one helped." Understanding began to dawn on Midori's face. "Except me," she said softly. "I performed CPR. I had training from a community course." Ishikawa nodded once, a barely perceptible gesture. "You kept him alive until paramedics arrived. You rode in the ambulance with him because he was alone. At the hospital, you provided what information you could to the medical staff, then left once family arrived. You never gave your full name, never sought recognition or reward." "I didn't do anything special," Midori said, discomfort evident in her posture. "Anyone would have helped." "But they didn't," Ishikawa replied, a hint of something harder entering his tone. 17 people were in that restaurant. You were the only one who moved to help rather than record his distress." He reached inside his jacket and removed a slim black leather case. From it, he extracted a photograph and placed it on the table between them. It showed a young man perhaps 25 years old, with features similar to Ishikawa's but softer, less defined by authority and power. "This was my younger brother Takeshi," Ishikawa said, his voice still controlled, but with an undercurrent of emotion that hadn't been present before. He had been diagnosed with cardiomyopathy 3 years earlier. That night was his first time venturing out alone after a particularly difficult treatment period. Midori stared at the photograph, recognition flickering across her features. I remember his face now. He was so young. Did he recover? Your actions gave him 6 more months of life, Ishikawa said. 6 months he spent mostly at home with family, but with dignity and comfort. Without your intervention, he would have died on that restaurant floor. The weight of the connection between them settled in the room. Midori looked up from the photograph to meet Ishikawa's gaze. I'm sorry for your loss, she said simply, but still confused about why you would involve yourself in my case now, 5 years later. In my world, Ishikawa replied, debts must be repaid. When my brother died, I made inquiries about the woman who had helped him. All anyone remembered was a quiet waitress who vanished after the ambulance left. I had only a partial name and description. He poured more tea for both of them, the ritual giving him a moment to compose his next words. 3 months ago, one of my associates mentioned a case he had heard about, a cleaning woman accused of stealing from Nakamura Financial. It caught my attention because Nakamura has connections to certain organizations I monitor carefully. When I obtained a copy of the case file and saw your photograph, I recognized you immediately from descriptions of the waitress who saved my brother. Midori absorbed this information slowly. So, your help today was repaying a debt you felt you owed me? Partially, Ishikawa acknowledged. But there was more. The deeper my people investigated your case, the more inconsistencies emerged. The Nakamura Group has been involved in questionable financial activities for years. When we examined their records more thoroughly, the truth became clear. You were being framed to cover their operations. But why me specifically? I'm nobody. Which made you the perfect scapegoat, Ishikawa pointed out. A woman with multiple jobs, no family connections, no resources to mount a proper defense. Who would believe your word against a prestigious financial institution? They likely assumed you would accept a plea bargain for a reduced sentence rather than risk trial. Midori's hands tightened around her teacup. I refused their offer of 8 years instead of 15. I couldn't admit to something I didn't do, even if it meant a longer sentence. Something like approval flickered in Ishikawa's expression. Principles are rare in this world. My brother would have respected that. He was similar, unwilling to compromise his beliefs even when it would have been easier. A server entered briefly to deliver a simple but elegant meal, grilled fish, seasonal vegetables, and rice. Once they were alone again, Midori looked directly at Ishikawa. What happens now? The judge only suspended the sentencing. The charges weren't dismissed. They will be, Ishikawa said with calm certainty. The evidence I provided is merely the beginning. By the time your next court date arrives, the Nakamura Group will be facing federal investigation for financial crimes. Their attempt to frame you will be the least of their concerns. He broke apart his chopsticks with precise movements. As for your immediate situation, I've taken the liberty of securing temporary accommodation for you. An apartment in Shibuya, modest but comfortable. 3 months' rent paid in advance, giving you time to rebuild your life without immediate financial pressure. Midori set down her chopsticks, untouched. That's extremely generous, but unnecessary. You've already done more than enough by preventing my wrongful imprisonment. It's not charity, Ishikawa replied evenly. It's the completion of a debt. My brother's life was valuable beyond measure to our family. 6 additional months with him cannot be repaid with a single court appearance. Before Midori could respond, the door slid open again. One of Ishikawa's men entered and bowed deeply. Forgive the interruption, Ishikawa-sama. There's a situation requiring your attention. Ishikawa nodded once. I'll join you momentarily. After the man withdrew, he turned back to Midori. Business matters often interrupt at inconvenient times. Please, continue your meal. My driver will take you to the apartment afterward. Wait, Midori said as he prepared to rise. You mentioned in court that your organization sometimes used Nakamura Financial for transactions. Were you admitting to illegal activities in open court? A subtle smile touched Ishikawa's lips. An interesting question from someone who just benefited from those connections. The world is rarely as clear-cut as legal and illegal, Hayashi-san. My organization operates in many spheres, some more visible than others. With that cryptic response, he stood and gave her a formal bow, the kind of respect rarely shown to waitresses and cleaning women. "We'll speak again soon. For now, please accept the accommodation as partial payment of my debt to you." After Ishikawa departed, Midori sat alone in the private dining room, the elaborate meal before her, a stark contrast to detention center food. The past hours felt surreal, from conviction and a 15-year sentence to unexpected freedom through the intervention of a man whose power and connections were clearly extensive and not entirely above board. She ate little, despite the quality of the food. Her mind was processing too much to focus on appetite. When she finally emerged from the restaurant, the same black sedan waited outside, a different driver standing beside it with formal posture. The apartment in Shibuya proved modest by affluent standards, but luxurious compared to anywhere Midori had ever lived. One bedroom, modern furnishings, a small balcony overlooking a quiet street. The refrigerator was stocked with essentials, and a new phone sat on the kitchen counter with a note indicating it was activated and paid for 1 year. After the driver departed with another formal bow, Midori explored the space that would apparently be her home for at least the next 3 months. The closet contained several new outfits in exactly her size, still with tags attached. The bathroom was stocked with high-quality toiletries. Everything spoke of careful preparation and attention to detail. On the small desk in the living area, she found an envelope containing 100,000 yen in cash and a business card with only a phone number printed on it. No name, no company. She sank onto the comfortable sofa, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Hours earlier, she had been facing 15 years in prison for a crime she hadn't committed. Now she sat in a fully furnished apartment provided by a man who was, by his own oblique admission, involved in activities that operated in legal gray areas at best. The new phone on the counter chimed with an incoming message. When she checked it, she found a text from an unlisted number. "The Nakamura executives have been contacted by federal investigators. Your case will be formally dismissed within days rather than weeks. Rest well, we will speak again soon." No signature was necessary. The precision of the message, like everything else about Kazuto Ishikawa, conveyed his identity clearly enough. Midori set the phone down and walked to the balcony, sliding open the door to let in the evening air. Tokyo stretched before her, lights beginning to illuminate the dusk. She had lived in this city for 10 years, always on its margins, always struggling to maintain the simplest existence. 3 jobs, tiny apartments shared with other workers, counting coins for train fare. That had been her reality. Now she stood at the edge of something entirely different. Freedom from false charges, yes, but also connection to a world of power she had never imagined entering. All because 5 years ago, she had done what seemed obvious and human, helped a stranger in distress. The media storm broke the following morning. Midori awoke to find every major news outlet reporting on the dramatic developments in her case. The headlines varied, but carried the same essential story. Nakamura Financial Group under federal investigation for money laundering. Yakuza boss intervenes in court to prevent miscarriage of justice. Cleaning woman framed to cover financial crimes. Her phone, both the new one provided by Ishikawa and her old number, somehow transferred to the new device, rang constantly with requests for interviews. She declined them all, uncomfortable with sudden attention after years of intentional invisibility. By mid-afternoon, an official notice arrived from the court. All charges against her had been formally dismissed. The prosecutor's office released a carefully worded statement about new evidence coming to light without mentioning Ishikawa's dramatic courtroom intervention. 3 days after the trial, Midori ventured out to visit her former neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Tanaka, who had stored some of her belongings when she was arrested. The outing proved challenging. A reporter recognized her near the train station, leading to uncomfortable questions shouted as she hurried away. When she returned to the Shibuya apartment, she found an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 5 years earlier, a small article about a young man who had suffered cardiac arrest in a local restaurant and been saved by a quick-thinking waitress who performed CPR. The waitress wasn't named in the article, identified only as a staff member who requested anonymity. Paper-clipped to the article was a note in elegant handwriting. "Some debts can never be fully repaid, but honor demands we try." That evening, as Midori prepared a simple dinner in the apartment's well-equipped kitchen, A knock at the door startled her. She approached cautiously, looking through the peephole to find a middle-aged woman in elegant traditional clothing standing in the hallway. A single bodyguard positioned respectfully behind her. When Midori opened the door, the woman bowed formally. "Hayashi-san, forgive the intrusion. I am Sachiko Ishikawa. May I speak with you briefly?" The woman's resemblance to Kazuto was subtle but unmistakable. The same composed bearing, the same intensity in her gaze. Midori stepped aside, inviting her in with automatic hospitality ingrained from years of service work. "I've prepared tea," Sachiko said, gesturing to her bodyguard, who carried a traditional wooden box. "If you would permit me to serve you." The request inverted the usual social dynamic so completely that Midori found herself speechless. This elegant woman, clearly from a wealthy and powerful family, was asking permission to serve tea to a former waitress and cleaning woman. Midori managed a nod, watching as Sachiko dismissed her bodyguard and began unpacking the tea service with practiced movements. The ceremony that followed was conducted with perfect form, each gesture deliberate and meaningful. Only after the first cup had been prepared and presented did Sachiko speak again. "I am Kazuto, and Takeshi's mother. I've come to thank you properly for what you did for my younger son." Midori accepted the cup with appropriate formality. "Your son already expressed gratitude far beyond what my actions deserved." "Kazuto told me of your modesty," Sachiko replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But you must understand what your actions truly meant to our family. Takeshi was diagnosed at 22. The doctors gave him 3 years at most. He lived almost 6, and the final months, after you helped him, were precious beyond measure." She produced a small photograph from within her kimono sleeve and placed it on the table. It showed the young man from the earlier photograph, clearly weakened but smiling, seated in a garden with cherry trees in bloom. "This was taken 2 months after you saved him," Sachiko continued. "He was able to see one last spring, to sit beneath the cherry blossoms with his family, to finish the book he had been writing. These gifts came from your hands." Midori looked at the photograph, emotion tightening her throat. "I'm glad he had that time, truly. But please understand, I didn't do anything extraordinary. Anyone with basic training would have done the same." "But they didn't," Sachiko said, echoing her son's words from the previous day. 17 people stood by. Only you acted. She prepared another cup of tea with precise movements. "In our family, we believe that actions reveal character more clearly than words ever could. Your action that night revealed a rare quality." The tea ceremony continued in silence for several minutes, the ritual creating a peaceful space between them. When it concluded, Sachiko packed the implements with the same care with which she had arranged them. "My son has explained that he feels indebted to you," she said finally. "But I wish you to understand that this is not merely about repayment. In our world, connections forged through life-changing moments carry special significance. You are now connected to our family through your actions, whether you sought such connection or not." Midori considered this carefully. "I'm grateful for Ishikawa-san's help with my legal troubles, but I'm not comfortable being indebted to anyone, especially someone in his position." Sachiko's expression softened slightly. "A principled response. Kazuto predicted you would feel this way." She rose gracefully to her feet. "I will not take more of your time today. But know this, what my son offers is not charity seeking gratitude, but honor acknowledging honor. Consider carefully before refusing such recognition." With a final formal bow, Sachiko departed, leaving Midori alone with the photograph of Takeshi in the garden and thoughts more complicated than any she had faced during her trial. The following morning brought another visitor, this time expected. Fumiko Nakano, her court-appointed attorney who had shown such minimal effort during the trial, arrived bearing gifts and effusive apologies. "The evidence was so compelling," she explained, setting down an elaborate fruit basket, "and the Nakamura group has such influence. I truly believed you had no defense. Yet you agreed to represent me," Midori pointed out quietly. Nakano had the grace to look ashamed. "Court appointments pay very little, Hayashi-san. I have my own practice to maintain. And now? Why are you here now that the charges have been dismissed?" "To make amends," Nakano said quickly. "And to offer my services for the civil suit, of course." Midori frowned. "Civil suit? Against Nakamura Financial, Nakano exclaimed. False accusation, wrongful imprisonment, damage to reputation. We could seek substantial damages. I would take the case on contingency naturally. The transparent opportunism might have angered Midori just days earlier. Now, she simply felt tired. Thank you for coming, Nakano-san. I'll consider it and contact you if I decide to proceed. After showing the disappointed attorney out, Midori returned to the living room and picked up the phone with the unlisted number she had been given. After a moment's hesitation, she dialed the single number programmed into its memory. It was answered on the second ring. Yes? Kazuto Ishikawa's voice was instantly recognizable. This is Midori Hayashi, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. I believe we need to speak further about what happens next. The traditional tea house in Ueno Park seemed an unlikely place for this meeting, yet somehow appropriate. Midori arrived early, watching koi fish navigate the small pond beside the wooden structure. The garden's tranquility offered a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed her life since the courthouse drama a week earlier. She had chosen this public location deliberately, uncomfortable with the power imbalance that came with meeting Kazuto Ishikawa in spaces he controlled. Here, surrounded by tourists and locals enjoying the park, some neutrality might be possible. He arrived precisely on time, alone, a significant departure from his usual security detail. In simple dark trousers and a white button-down shirt, he might have been any successful businessman taking a lunch meeting, though his natural authority remained unmistakable. Hayashi-san, he greeted her with a formal bow. Thank you for suggesting this location. It's been some time since I visited these gardens. They were shown to a private room overlooking the pond, simple but elegant, with traditional tatami flooring and low table. After tea was served and they were left alone, Midori spoke first. The media attention is becoming problematic, she said directly. Reporters have found my previous apartment building. They've contacted my former employers. I've received interview requests from every major network. Ishikawa nodded. Fame arrives uninvited and outstays its welcome. This interest will fade once a newer scandal captures their attention. That's not my only concern, Midori continued. Your intervention has created connections between us that I never sought. Your mother visited me. My former attorney assumes I'll file a lucrative civil suit. People look at me differently, wondering what special relationship I must have with the Ishikawa family. She set down her teacup with careful control. I appreciated your help with the legal case. I understand it was motivated by gratitude for what I did for your brother, but I need clarity on what happens now. Ishikawa studied her for a moment before responding. Most people in your position would be exploring ways to capitalize on the connection. Your concern about it speaks to your character. I'm not interested in capitalizing on anything, Midori said firmly. I want to rebuild my life on my own terms. Admirable, Ishikawa replied, and not surprising, given what my research revealed about you. No social media presence, no debt despite modest income, no criminal record, 3 jobs, all maintained with positive references, a life of quiet dignity and independence. He poured more tea for both of them, the simple act performed with the same precision that characterized all his movements. The apartment in Shibuya is yours for as long as you wish to use it. The stipend deposited monthly into your account will continue for 1 year. Both are freely given with no expectations attached. And after that year, Midori asked. After that, our formal obligation would be concluded, he said. Though the connection established would remain, should you ever have need of it. Midori absorbed this, watching ripples spread across the pond outside as a leaf touched the surface. I'm still uncomfortable accepting such generosity based on a simple act anyone should have performed. But they didn't, Ishikawa pointed out, echoing his mother's words. That distinction matters. Before Midori could respond, her phone chimed with a news alert. She glanced at it automatically, then froze. Ishikawa noticed her reaction immediately. What is it? She turned the phone so he could see the headline. Nakamura Financial CEO found dead in apparent suicide amid expanding investigation. Ishikawa's expression didn't change, but something subtle shifted in his posture. When did this happen? The article says he was discovered this morning at his home, Midori said, scanning the text. After federal investigators expanded their probe to include tax evasion and bribery charges. She looked up at him, a new wariness in her gaze. Did you have anything to do with this? I did not order or suggest his death, if that's your question, Ishikawa replied calmly. Though I am not surprised by it. Men like Nakamura often choose such exits when their carefully constructed facades crumble. His voice carried absolute conviction, yet Midori found herself studying him with renewed awareness of exactly who sat across from her, not merely a grateful brother, but a man who controlled one of Tokyo's most powerful organizations. The investigation into Nakamura Financial will accelerate now, Ishikawa continued. Federal prosecutors will seek cooperating witnesses. The true extent of their operations will emerge over the coming weeks. And your organization's involvement with them? The question was bold, perhaps dangerously so, but Ishikawa seemed to appreciate her directness. Properly insulated through multiple layers, my concern was justice for you, not protection for myself. Their conversation paused as a server entered with a light lunch. Seasonal tempura vegetables, grilled fish, and pickled accompaniments. When they were alone again, Midori decided to address the underlying question. In court, you admitted your organization used Nakamura for certain transactions, she said. You essentially confessed to illegal activities to help clear my name. I need to understand why you would take such a risk. Ishikawa selected a piece of tempura with his chopsticks, considering her question. The admission posed minimal legal risk. Without specific details, no prosecutor would pursue charges based on such a general statement. The strategic value of establishing credibility with the court outweighed the negligible exposure. His analytical response, weighing risk against advantage with such calm precision, reminded Midori again of the complex figure across from her. The man who had saved her from prison was also someone accustomed to calculating every move in a dangerous game. There's something else you should know, Ishikawa said, after they had eaten in silence for several minutes. The prosecutor from your case, Tanabe, has requested early retirement. The judge is facing an ethics investigation. Your former attorney, Nakano, has received formal censure from the Bar Association for inadequate representation. Midori set down her chopsticks. You arranged all this? Justice takes many forms, Ishikawa replied simply. Some through official channels, others through appropriate pressure applied. Correctly. Revenge, you mean. Accountability, he corrected. Each person who participated in the injustice against you now faces appropriate consequences, nothing more severe than their actions warranted. A chill ran through Midori, despite the warm day. I never asked for this. You didn't need to ask, Ishikawa said. Honor demanded it. The concept seemed to guide his actions completely. A code as binding to him as any law, perhaps more so. Midori had encountered such rigid principles before only in books or historical dramas, never in modern Tokyo. There's one matter we haven't discussed, Ishikawa continued, changing direction. Your professional future. Your previous employers have filled your positions. The media attention makes returning to service work temporarily complicated. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim envelope. An opportunity, if you're interested. The Himawari Foundation funds educational initiatives for underprivileged children. They seek a program coordinator for their after-school services. The position comes with appropriate compensation and benefits. Midori accepted the envelope hesitantly. Is this foundation connected to your organization? It's entirely legitimate, Ishikawa assured her. Founded by my mother 30 years ago, properly registered and audited. Their work focuses on children from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing educational support and meals. Why would they hire me? I have no qualifications for such work. You have life experience these children would recognize, Ishikawa countered, and demonstrated character under pressure. The foundation director is aware of your recent circumstances and impressed by your resilience. The position is offered on merit, not charity. Midori tucked the envelope into her bag without opening it. I'll consider it. As their meal concluded and they prepared to depart, Ishikawa presented her with a small wooden box. One last item to complete our formal obligation. This belonged to my brother Takeshi. Inside lay a jade pendant carved with a traditional symbol for protection. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the stone glowing with subtle inner light. He carried this throughout his illness, Ishikawa explained. Before he died, he asked that it be given to the woman who showed him kindness when others turned away. We couldn't fulfill this request until now. Midori stared at the pendant, emotion tightening her throat. I can't accept something so personal. It was his explicit wish, Ishikawa insisted gently. Denying it would dishonor his memory. With reluctant hands, Midori lifted the pendant from its box. The jade felt warm against her palm, as if retaining some essence of its previous owner. Thank you, she said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions the gift evoked. They parted at the garden's entrance, Ishikawa bowing formally before walking toward a black sedan that appeared precisely as he approached, the curb. Midori watched him depart, the jade pendant heavy in her hand, before turning toward the subway station to begin her own journey back to the borrowed Shibuya apartment. 3 days later, Midori sat across from Yumiko Himawari, the director of the foundation Ishikawa had mentioned. The organization's offices occupied a modest building in a residential district, the interior bright and welcoming, with children's artwork displayed prominently on walls. Your life experience would be valuable to our students, Director Himawari explained. She was a practical-looking woman in her 60s with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner. Many come from situations where they've been overlooked or underestimated, as you were. They need role models who understand resilience firsthand. I'm not sure I'm qualified to guide children, Midori admitted. My education is basic. I have no teaching credentials. Credentials can be acquired, the director replied. Character cannot. We can provide training for the technical aspects of the position. As they toured the facility, Midori observed an after-school session in progress. 20 children between ages 8 and 12 worked on homework, while volunteers circulated offering assistance. In another room, younger children engaged in structured play activities. Most are from single-parent households, Director Himawari explained. Parents working multiple jobs, limited home supervision. We provide safe space, nutritional support, and educational assistance. A small boy looked up from his workbook as they passed, offering Midori a hesitant smile that she found herself returning automatically. Something about the environment felt immediately comfortable, perhaps because it represented the support she herself had lacked as a child. I'd like to accept the position, she decided aloud, surprising herself with the certainty. Though, I'll need time to complete any required training. Excellent, the director responded, genuine pleasure in her expression. We'll start you next week with orientation. The children will benefit from your perspective. As they finalized details in the director's office, Midori asked the question that had lingered since Ishikawa's recommendation. May I ask about the foundation's relationship with the Ishikawa family? Kazuto Ishikawa suggested this opportunity to me. Director Himawari's expression remained professional, though her eyes reflected awareness of the question's implications. Sachiko Ishikawa established this foundation 3 decades ago and remains our primary benefactor. Her financial support is documented, transparent, and regularly audited. What her son or husband manage in their business affairs remains entirely separate from our work. The answer was diplomatic yet clear. The foundation maintained appropriate distance while acknowledging its origins. Midori appreciated both the honesty and the boundaries. One last question, Midori said. How much do you know about my recent situation, the court case and its resolution? Enough to understand you were wrongly accused and subsequently cleared, the director replied. The details are your private business unless you choose to share them. We judge people by their actions here, not by rumors or news reports. The simple dignity of this response settled something in Midori. Whatever connection had brought her to this opportunity, the work itself would be evaluated on its own merits. She could build something new here, separate from both her former struggles and the complicated debt that had rescued her from injustice. 2 months later, Midori stood in the community center, attached to the Himawari Foundation, watching children present projects they had developed under her guidance. A simple photography exhibition titled Our Neighborhood Through Our Eyes displayed images captured by students using donated cameras. Parents moved through the space admiring their children's work, many arriving directly from jobs still wearing uniforms or work clothes. The pride in their expressions as they viewed their children's accomplishments transcended their obvious exhaustion. Midori circulated quietly, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Her role had expanded beyond initial expectations. She now coordinated 3 after-school programs and had developed a weekend workshop series that brought in community volunteers to teach specialized skills. Hayashi-sensei, a 9-year-old girl tugged at her sleeve. My mom finally came. Can I show her my pictures now? Of course, Yuki-chan, Midori smiled. Remember to explain your artist statement just like we practiced. As the child hurried away to greet her mother, Midori felt a presence beside her. She turned to find Sachiko Ishikawa observing the exhibition with quiet approval. You've done remarkable work in a short time, Sachiko said by way of greeting. Director Himawari speaks highly of your contributions. The children did the work, Midori replied. I just provided structure and encouragement. Sometimes that's precisely what's needed. Sachiko moved to examine one of the photographs more closely. A striking image of an elderly man feeding pigeons, taken from a child's low perspective. You've given them tools to show how they see the world, a powerful gift. They walked together through the exhibition, pausing occasionally to acknowledge parents or praise young photographers. Midori had grown more comfortable in her new role, developing a quiet authority that commanded respect without intimidation. A leadership style entirely her own, neither mimicking her previous employers nor the powerful figures who had changed her circumstances. My son mentioned you might be reluctant to use the Shibuya apartment beyond the initial period, Sachiko said as they reached a quiet corner. He respects your independence, but asked me to extend an alternative. She produced a small envelope. The foundation maintains several residences for staff in this neighborhood. One becomes available next month. The location would be convenient for your work, and the arrangement would be part of your compensation package rather than personal obligation. Midori accepted the envelope, recognizing the thoughtful solution it represented. Thank you. This feels more appropriate to my situation. You've found your place here, Sachiko observed. The children respond to your guidance. They recognize someone who understands their circumstances, Midori said. Many have parents working multiple jobs, just as I did. They know what it means to be overlooked. Before Sachiko could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Several reporters had somehow discovered the event and were attempting to gain access, cameras and microphones ready. Is Midori Hayashi here? One called out. We'd like to ask about the Nakamura investigation developments. The Foundation's security staff moved to intercept them, but not before several children turned curiously toward the disturbance. Midori felt her hard-won peace threatening to shatter as her past intruded into this new space she had created. Sachiko touched her arm lightly. Use the back entrance. My driver will take you home. I'll ensure the event continues smoothly. Midori hesitated, torn between flight and responsibility. The children's presentation will proceed as planned, Sachiko assured her. Director Himawari and I will oversee it. This is your program, but you don't need to sacrifice your privacy for it. Recognizing the wisdom in this advice, Midori slipped through the back hallway as the security team firmly but politely escorted the reporters from the premises. Sachiko's driver waited at the service entrance, car engine already running. Back in the Shibuya apartment, Midori turned on the news to discover what had prompted the renewed media interest. The announcement was dramatic. Federal prosecutors had filed comprehensive charges against 6 former executives of Nakamura Financial Group, detailing money laundering operations that had processed over 2 billion yen for various criminal organizations over the past decade. More shocking was the revelation that Prosecutor Tanabe, who had so aggressively pursued Midori's case, had been indicted for accepting bribes to direct investigations away from the Nakamura Group's activities. Judge Matsuda was now under formal investigation for similar corruption charges. The report included footage from Midori's trial, focusing particularly on Kazuto Ishikawa's dramatic intervention. The reporters speculated about connections between Ishikawa's organizations and the Nakamura scandal, though carefully noting that no charges had been filed against him. Midori turned off the television, disturbed by seeing her face broadcast again after weeks of relative anonymity. Just as she had begun rebuilding her life, the past resurfaced, threatening the delicate balance she had established. Her phone rang, the special one provided by Ishikawa. She answered hesitantly. "You've seen the news?" His voice came through, not a question but a statement. "Yes. The reporters found me at the Foundation's event tonight." "An unfortunate but predictable development," Ishikawa replied. The investigation has expanded beyond our initial expectations. Certain individuals are attempting to redirect attention toward our connection. Will you be implicated? Midori asked directly. No. The single word carried absolute certainty. My organization's interactions with Nakamura were properly insulated and limited. The prosecutors have more substantial targets. A moment of silence stretched between them before he continued. However, your association with me may continue to draw unwanted attention. I've taken steps to address this. What steps? Midori asked, wariness creeping into her voice. Nothing concerning, Ishikawa assured her. Simply an official statement from my legal representatives clarifying that my courtroom intervention was motivated solely by personal gratitude for your assistance to my late brother. All documented and legitimate. The efficiency with which he managed even this aspect of their unusual connection reminded Midori again of the vast differences in their worlds. While she taught children to express themselves through photography, he orchestrated complex legal and public relations strategies with apparent ease. Thank you, she said simply. I've been offered staff housing through the foundation. I think it's time I moved from this apartment. A wise decision, Ishikawa agreed. The foundation position suits you. My mother mentioned your program has been particularly successful. The conversation concluded shortly after, leaving Midori to pack her few possessions in preparation for yet another transition. The jade pendant Takeshi had wanted her to have caught the lamplight as she lifted it from the bedside table. After a moment's hesitation, she fastened it around her neck, not as a symbol of connection to the Ishikawa family, but as a reminder of the single act of kindness that had altered so many lives, including her own. 6 months later, Midori stood outside Tokyo Women's Correctional Facility, waiting as visitors exited through security procedures. When she had requested this meeting, she'd been uncertain it would be approved. Now, watching families departing after seeing incarcerated loved ones, she wondered if coming had been wise. Her life had stabilized in recent months. The media interest had finally waned as the Nakamura prosecution proceeded through courts without new dramatic developments. Her work at the foundation had expanded to include a new program helping teenagers prepare for university entrance exams or vocational training. The staff apartment proved modest but comfortable, walking distance from work and far more suitable than the luxury of the Shibuya residence. She had seen Kazuto Ishikawa only twice during this period, brief, formal encounters at foundation fundraising events, where his mother served as honorary chairperson. Their interactions had been cordial but distant. The debt between them apparently settled to mutual satisfaction, until 3 days ago when she had impulsively requested this meeting after reading news of the sentencing. Former prosecutor Junichiro Tanabe had received 8 years for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The man who had so confidently sought to send her to prison for 15 years now faced incarceration himself. The irony wasn't lost on Midori, nor was the complex emotion it evoked. Not satisfaction exactly, but something more complicated. A need for closure perhaps, or understanding. When Tanabe emerged into the visitors' processing area, he stopped abruptly upon seeing her, recognition and confusion crossing his features simultaneously. He looked diminished in prison-issued clothing, his previously immaculate appearance replaced by institutional plainness. "Ms. Hayashi," he said finally, his voice lacking its former courtroom confidence. "This is unexpected. Thank you for agreeing to meet," Midori replied, maintaining formal politeness despite the circumstances. "There's a coffee shop nearby, if you're permitted to visit briefly." Tanabe glanced toward the corrections officer who had escorted him out. "I have 2 hours before evening check-in." The coffee shop was small and quiet, the kind of place that attracted neither tourists nor trendsetters. They sat at a corner table, 2 paper cups of mediocre coffee between them, the surreal reversal of their positions hanging unacknowledged in the air. "May I ask why you wanted to see me?" Tanabe finally broke the silence. "If you're seeking an apology—" "I'm not," Midori interrupted gently. "I wanted to understand something that's bothered me since the trial. You knew I was innocent, didn't you? Even before Ishikawa intervened." Tanabe's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. The months in detention had aged him, lines deeper around his eyes and mouth. "I suspected the evidence was problematic," he admitted finally, "but Nakamura was insistent, and my superiors made it clear the case was a priority. So you were willing to send an innocent person to prison for 15 years because it was convenient. Midori stated this without anger, simply seeking confirmation. The system often requires compromises, Tanabe replied, a weak defense that sounded hollow, even to his own ears judging by his grimace. I had told myself, you would likely receive a reduced sentence on appeal, but you argued for maximum sentencing. Yes, the simple acknowledgement seemed to cost him something. I have had considerable time to reflect on these choices recently. They sat in silence for several minutes, Midori studying the man who had so confidently sought to destroy her life. She found no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sadness for the broken systems that had enabled his corruption and nearly claimed her freedom. I didn't come for an apology, Midori said finally. I came to tell you that I forgive you. Tanabe's head snapped up, genuine shock in his expression. Why would you do that? Because holding on to anger would only damage me further, she replied simply. And because seeing you now reminds me that justice eventually finds its way, though not always through expected channels. As she prepared to leave, having said what she came to say, Tanabe spoke again. Ishikawa, be careful with that connection. His intervention in your case wasn't purely altruistic, regardless of the story about his brother. Midori paused. What do you mean? Nakamura Financial was processing funds for the Ishikawa organization's rivals, Tanabe explained. Your case gave him perfect cover to expose their operations and eliminate competition while appearing heroic. Don't mistake strategic action for genuine benevolence. She considered this perspective, one that hadn't occurred to her previously. Was it possible her rescue had served multiple purposes? The thought was unsettling, yet somehow not entirely surprising. Thank you for the warning, she said finally. But I believe debts between us are now fully settled, regardless of additional motivations that may have existed. Walking back to her apartment through the early evening streets, Midori touched the jade pendant that had become a habitual gesture. Perhaps Tanabe was right about Ishikawa's intervention, serving multiple purposes. Perhaps true altruism rarely existed in its purest form, but she had learned that actions mattered more than perfect motivations. Her simple decision to help a stranger 5 years ago had created ripples she could never have anticipated. Kazuto Ishikawa's decision to intervene in her case, whatever complex reasons might have informed it, had given her freedom and opportunity when justice had failed. The cherry trees along her street were beginning to blossom, their delicate pink flowers catching the last light of day. Midori paused to admire them, remembering the photograph of Takeshi Ishikawa enjoying his final spring. Some debts could never be fully calculated or repaid. Some connections, once formed, remained beyond simple transaction. Tomorrow she would return to the foundation, guiding children whose experiences mirrored her own early struggles. She would help them find their voices, their perspectives, their strength, passing forward the unexpected second chance she had received. The jade pendant caught the fading sunlight as cherry blossoms drifted down around her. Nature's reminder that beauty and renewal often emerged from the most difficult circumstances.